And she was president of the German Society of German Research, and her work focused mostly in phenomenology, political philosophy, philosophy of law, and ethics. And she published very important books. For instance, one that we will discuss next week, which is called Phenomenology of Plurality, Hannah Arendt on Political Intersubjectivity, from 2018. And her dissertation, her doctoral dissertation, was Anspruch und Reflexion, published by Springer in 2009. And then she has another book, which is called Einführung in Direct Phenomenologie, Introduction to the Phenomenology of Law, published in 2010, which was translated into Japanese. And she is co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of Political Phenomenology. And it's a great honor to have her here. It's the first time that she's here in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And we have enjoyed the time we spent with you during these weeks, informally, in this friendly gathering. We already talked to you privately, but we are very, very happy to have the possibility to listen to your conference today. And I would like to say everyone that she will be also presenting next week at the Faculty of Philosophy, PUAN, the University of Buenos Aires, another paper on Hannah Arendt as a phenomenologist. So now you can start whenever you want.
So I want to start with saying thank you. Muchas gracias. It is so fantastic to be here. And I've enjoyed my time here and the intellectual and personal exchange so much. I want to thank Celia most of all, but so many people have been involved in this to happen. Azul and Luis Rabanake and Andres, who picked me up from the airport, you know, and Francesco, and it is really wonderful to be here. It is wonderful to see what a lively community you are, and how much is going on. So it's a great honor for me to also be able to present some ideas to you today. I know it is late. I hope, yeah, we will pull through together. And I try not to be longer than 50 minutes. And if I am, you just wave your hand to me and say, it's enough, Sophie. Okay? All right. So what does it mean to appear and to act in public? The existential importance of public spaces and encounters have become clear to many of us in the past years of the pandemic, especially through experiences of deprivation. Deserted public squares and cities, universities suddenly only in an online mode, public events repeatedly postponed to an uncertain future, while the border between home and office was finally erased. But already in the period before that, classic concepts of the public and the private spheres have been put to the test, both theoretically and practically. They are massively rearranged and hybridized by advancing technology and economization. The dream of a free, pluralistic internet or exchange via the global infrastructure of the internet has long since given way to sobering and unsettling realities. And this is where this here comes in, right? And all those kinds of phenomena which you all know very well. What we see today is either a thoroughly commercialized field in the shape of platforms dominating by a few big tech players and their non-transparent algorithms, or a state-controlled web. Last but not least, the political events of the recent years have shown us in a variety of ways the conditions under which the public sphere is claimed, but also deformed and even destroyed. From fake news to digitalized manipulation to the very classic rebellion on the street. all of this still exists and is existing, but is suppressed at the same time, and every time accompanied by social media on a local and a global level. All of these are contemporary experiences and moments of public crisis. But isn't it a cliche to talk about a crisis? If we look at the literature, the public sphere is in crisis could be the motto, I go back here again, could be the motto of an overarching theme already for a good 100 years. So the public sphere is in crisis, as I want to show you in the first part of my talk, is definitely not something that in the literature would be new. And also of the experience of people would be new. Apart from that, the contemporary interdisciplinary landscape of public sphere research has become enormously complex. Often it seems as if abstract and experientially non-transparent mechanisms such as data economy and AI technology are juxtaposed to a picture of users that are regarded as enclosed psychological subjects, for example, as addressees of consumer products or as victims of addictions and manipulations. This again then is linked to the idea about the public sphere as a fundamental pillar of democracy. And this can be confusing, even if each aspect has its justified place in the scientific discourse. It seems that they are all unified only by a one big, rather vague concern about the state of affairs. Let me thus try to take you on a journey through some discourses on the public realm and my own attempt to anchor it in the life world and describe it in types and forms of public experiences. What I would like to do in the following is to present to you some main ideas of the book I am trying to write. And actually, to be quite honest, it is becoming two books. To put it in a nutshell, I'm interested in how publicness, the publisher doesn't know that yet, so don't tell them. I'm interested in how publicness, how being, appearing, and acting in public yields specific types of experiences. And for this, I also turn to the phenomenological tradition. This is a tentative table of contents of the book which I originally wanted to write, and this is becoming an own book here, because I first thought I can very quickly turn to the phenomenological tradition, because in fact there is not so much. But then if you look at it from a different way, it gets more and more interesting. And I'm going to talk about this today as well, and just give you a broad overview over what my general ideas are for both projects. So the structure of the talk I take from this. So first I'm going to introduce you a little bit to a discourse on the public sphere in the last 100 years, let's say. Then I focus on the phenomenological approach. Then I go into what I'm working on right now, actually, the public realm and the phenomenological tradition. And the fourth part, if we still have time, would be a more tentative work in progress part where I'm trying out some ideas. So first part, as mentioned before, it seems that the seminal theories of the public realm in the 20th century treat their subject matter mainly as something that is about to be destroyed or that has long since faded away anyway, combined with a serious concern about the fate of democracy in their times. Theories in the 20th century deal with the questions of mass democracy, mass media, totalitarian tendencies or regimes, capitalism, and commercialization, and how this transforms or destroys the public sphere. Think of Helmut Plessner's Die Grenzen der Gemeinschaft, Limits of Community from 1924. Dewey's The Public and Its Problems from 27, answering to Lippmann's The Phantom Public from 1925. Then, of course, Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition in 1958. Habermas, may he rest in peace, The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, great book from 1962. So very influential book that actually has quite a history by now. Also, Richard Sennett's The Fall of Public Man from 1977, or Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves ourselves to death from 1985, just to name a few. Often a sense of loss is conveyed while at the same time attempting to reawaken the powers of what is about to be lost. Public reason as a form of arguing, solving problems, and testing opinions together, or public happiness as fulfilling participation in the res publica, or public forms of distance to protect the individual. That's the case for Plessner. Public life as a meaningful world relation instead of self-centered navel gazing. This is what you find in Senate. But wait a minute, isn't this a cliche too? None of this was ever available to all members of society, and some groups were even deliberately excluded from it or not seen fit from it. And an often made accusation is therefore that these theories imply an elitist attitude and perpetuate a masculinist, white, bourgeois, colonialist, pseudo-universalism that would be nostalgic at least. Also turning to Enlightenment ideas, the bourgeois public sphere or the Athenian model, like in Arendt's case, or before that in Habermas' case, to turning to them as ideals might be in itself flawed, as feminist, neo-Marxist, and radical democratic criticisms have pointed out. Still, none of those critics would be willing to give up the concept of the public realm as such, as a theater of deliberation and exchange, and as a formative space of social identity. As Nancy Fraser put it so patently 35 years ago, quote, "The general idea of the public sphere is indispensable to critical theory," end of quote. There is thus a normative potential in the public domain that risks its own betrayal. This is the conceptual as well as the experiential space where theories of the public unfold and where they must constantly put their claims to the test. Now, I'm interested in the role of experience in these discourses, the different forms and shapes and critical functions it takes while seldomly being developed explicitly as a topic. For example, Sennett literally talks about public experience. This is where I stole the title from, without ever explaining his concept of experience, or even the term. He just takes it for granted. Dewey, by contrast, understands experience in a pragmatist and action-oriented sense. Oskar Negd and Alexander Kluge, which I forgot before, now they are here. They wrote a book called Öffentlichkeit und Erfahrung, Public Sphere and Experience, translated also very late, like Habermas's book, only in the 90s to English. And there they are exploring the possibilities of a so-called proletarian counterpublic, which is expressed in a form of Marxist, Maoist, psychoanalytical lingo. But essentially, the argument is the same as in Nancy Fraser's concept of subaltern counterpublics, which she developed nearly 20 years later in her critical response to Habermas. Negd and Kluge, who also responded to Habermas, show that mass media cartels fabricate, quote, "an illusory synthesis of the totality of society," end of quote, which includes language, psychic organization, forms of social interaction, and the public sphere. This constitutes as well as distorts experience, and specifically social experience of those who do not belong to the ruling classes. So that is their thesis. Experience in this case is thus a basic world, other, and self relation that can be formed and deformed, but then that can apparently also be liberated and expressed. On the one hand, Negd and Kluge's approach is a clear rejection of the Habermasian idea of a unified public sphere, where all can come together equally to exchange arguments. On the other hand, it is precisely about establishing new counterpublics by developing their own forms of experience, as they say. And this is very much the 70s talk, you know, discovering our own experiences in groups to form counterpublics. So that very much fits into the discourse of that time. Yet, the more influential development seems to be that experience becomes less and less important or reduced to behavior, as communication, media, and finally algorithms seems to determine what the public realm is. Already Habermas observes that the social psychological vocabulary levels down the public to social groups, and public opinion to the expression of an attitude, and thereby loses grip on the politically crucial and demanding concept and function of the public sphere. At the same time, systematic, institutional, informational, or discourse-focused approaches can and want to do without experiencing subjects. Think of Luhmann's sociological systems theory, where the public sphere can be viewed as a self-referential system of communication, observation, and coordination. Beyond that, media studies observe that in the age of mass media and television, the medium is the message, as you know from McLuhan, and form excludes content. That is Neil Postman. In the 21st century, the paradigm radically changes from the TV paradigm and passive consummation to the internet and social media. But user experience is now rather conceived as net behavior. Social psychological and game theoretical approaches start to analyze all kinds of behavioral effects nudged by algorithmic selection. Language processing, sentiment analysis, and similar computational methods break down meaningful speech embedded in meaningful practices into parts that are then rebuilt again. And what you get when you put this back together, you arrive at large language models. These, of course, also play a prominent role now as pseudo-communicators, thereby shaping the online public sphere in a specific way. We have clearly arrived in the age, to allude to Husserl, in the age of the mathematization of language, not only nature, with consequences that are at least as severe. The general approach of looking at big data in terms of millions of postings, which you can only evaluate by, again, using other algorithms. And if you work with media scholars, you know that this is the only way that they can work today. So that has become a scientific necessity. But at the same time, I think it is less and less clear what we are actually looking at. I would argue that often, so here's a book I could recommend from media studies, which is called Effective Publics by Sisi Papakarisi, and she also works with sentiment analysis, but she does it in a very philosophically interesting way. And that's an approach I find very interesting. She works on so the networks of formerly called Twitter during the Egyptian revolution and the protests in New York. And she makes a lot out of it. But apart from that, much of that work is not very elucidating, right? So I would argue that much of what is done today in this terms of big data research cannot grasp the dimensions where experiences and language or communication are world building and constitute spaces of meaning. This, however, and this will be one of the main claims of the book, is crucial if we are to understand how people can relate to their public existence and a public world, how they can integrate or disintegrate with it, gain or lose trust, and how a common world is either established or destroyed. So in a nutshell, I think that the normative, the technological, or the communicational, which goes together today in a very strong sense, and the psychological aspects are disconnected in research at the moment. And that's where I think a phenomenological notion of experience can help us to understand better in which ways people are meaningfully embedded in or alienated from different realms of the public. This comes with three theses. So, I mean, the review over the literature and the discourse is over now. I'm trying to move into a more direction where I now try to develop some theses from this review. So the first is experience matters for the constitution of the public realm. Public space, and even more so the public realm, which I use as an umbrella term. I will explain that later on. But if I say public realm, this is the most general notion I use, and then I differentiate public space, public sphere, and so on. So the public realm is not just a natural space, which is just there, no matter if anyone experiences it. It is to a significant part constituted by people experiencing it, participating in it, and thereby living it, actualizing it. Of course, there are also other important factors that constitute the public sphere, which are economic, institutional, technological factors, which are partly non-experiential. So my focus, and I think the necessary focus of a phenomenological investigation thus is the experiential public. So if you like, la public vécu or the lived public, and I do by no means mean to cover everything by that. I think it's important for a phenomenological approach also to know what it cannot cover, right? But just to say this is, and of this huge discourses on the public sphere, this is what I try to pick out. This is where I think we can do something about it. We cannot say things that are so helpful in terms of how does AI manipulate whatever functions on a computer level. I mean, we have computer scientists for that, right? I mean, at my university especially. So I think focusing on the experiential public also lets us see that there is still a lot to be described. Not only have these experiences become much more differentiated through digital technologies, they have become blurred between public and private, political, social, and economic spheres. And they also have, and this is also a thesis I would like to defend, an intrinsic normativity in the sense that they can succeed or fail. So what I want to claim is that the normativity is not just outside experience in a concept or idea of democracy, but it is built into the structure of experience and therefore is a very specific succeeding or failing in terms of public experiences. Theories that only see a communication system or a space for exercising public reason, legitimizing validity claims, for example, miss out on the fact that the public realm is nothing without people experiencing it, making sense of it, being meaningfully embedded into it. I think that one possible way of understanding our situation better is still to anchor it in the life world or in a plurality of life worlds. And not surprisingly, I think this is what a phenomenological approach can do. So I get to my second part. Phenomenology should be able to methodologically approach the topic of the experiential public in an exceptional way. After all, phenomenology is, as you know, according to its name, the investigation of appearances. Appearances appear to someone in a space of appearance and in a specific how of appearance, which includes mediation. Hence, experience, world, and appearance are terms that intrinsically belong together. Importantly, the ones who experience appearances are not Cartesian disembodied minds, but also appear in the world to others, who reciprocally also manifest themselves by appearing. The receivers of appearance are thus rooted in a world of appearance. One could call this world an essentially public world. This would constitute a basic framework of a phenomenological approach to the public realm. Yet, and this is an important point for me, this is very general and it is not all. To be in public means to appear in a basic but also in a specific sense. So in principle, as accessible to all, perceivable by all, or as something that is of common concern. This happens in a world that offers different levels of publicness and different positions of accessibility. They are shaped by cultural, historic, hegemonic, and technological factors. Experiencing publicness can succeed, but it can also fail and result in inaccessibility, intransparency, hypervisibility, or superficiality. It can even be disastrous for the person, for example, in public shaming. I thus regard public experiences not only to be positive and normatively endorsable, but I rather see them on a scale, and I'm rather interested in describing them as specific types of experiencing than in producing another normative theory of the public realm. This concerns, I want to look at those theories around the topics of self, sociality, world, and reason. And all of these four terms come in a continuum from an ideal flourishment to a negative image and state of downfall when exposed to publicness. So let me give you one example which is familiar to you. So reason. The idea of public reason is that it enhances in a significant way itself if it enters publicness, and reason, criticizing reason, results in more reason, in better reason, whatever. So making reason public changes it in a specific way, right? This is what I'm interested in. You could also say, and here's the other aspect. So this would be the very positive development. But I think you can also always see the other element where reason, and here you can think of Heidegger and everything he says about Öffentlichkeit, where everything gets superficial or, loses its deep meaning or whatever. And it is also publicness that changes this. So I'm interested in the specific quality that self-sociality, reason, whatever, can acquire if they're getting public, right? In public. And this is an open question, so I don't have all the answers for it, but this is the phenomenon in principle that's interesting me. Let me give you also another example how I think about this in a very broad way. Consider lingering around somewhere in public space where the infrastructure actively inhibits you to do so. I'm using this example because European universities are becoming more and more spaces where students can't sit down anymore anywhere. They become clean spaces, they look nice, but you can't linger. I mean, you're not invited to be there in a certain sense. So it is an experience that many students can share, I think. So not only will such an experience of lingering in public space where you're inhibited to do so, not only will this entail a certain what it is like, a phenomenal character for you, it will also entail a certain sense in which this hostile public space is there for you and how you fit in or not. Hence, by being in a certain conditional space, you experience it in a certain way from a certain angle, which creates what I would like to call a space of meaning. To be sure, this constitution is not undertaken by one single sovereign transcendental subject, but happens as a co-constitutional event of subjectivity, intersubjectivity, power, architecture, technology, and the bodily involvedness, immersedness to it. In this manifold co-constitution, a space unfolds. Spaces of meaning can be dynamic. They correspond to certain types of activities which open up different dimensions of meaning. Again, an example, if you start protesting against the obstruction of public lingering together with other people, you will experience a different space of meaning than just by trying to linger. A space of meaning is thus an oriented world which can be described by aspects of temporality, spatiality, affectivity, sociality, and a certain modality also, sequence, rhythm, and so on and so on. I now have two outlooks for you of how I would like to develop such an approach further. Firstly, by drawing on what is already there. So a history of the phenomenology of the public realm written with a systematic intent. And the second is sort of my own systematical approach, which draws from this. I don't know if we're going to get there. So experience and appearance-based conceptual clarifications of the public sphere, including a final slide on typological features of public sphere experiences. Third part. Given that phenomenology, as I said before, would be so predestined to investigate the public realm as an experiential realm, one must think that there are plenty of approaches to draw from in the phenomenological tradition. The opposite is the case, at least at first glance. Phenomenological investigations of the public realm are surprisingly rare. This is astounding for at least three reasons. First, social phenomena have always been in the focus of phenomenological investigations and have especially been given a revival in the last decade. Second, phenomenology has several methodological tools that would allow to address the phenomenon of the public realm in the specific way of an intersubjective experience of the public, concepts like intentionality, embodiment, appearance, intersubjectivity, world, attitude, horizon, habituality. I could go on, and you know about this. So there are a lot of concepts that would allow to penetrate very different kinds of public experiences. Third, and this is the most fascinating point probably, there are in fact pertinent works where one really only waits for the topic to be addressed and where it would perfectly fit in the layout. For example, Alfred Schütz's Structures of the Life World. Still, the references throughout the main authors are rather disparate, sorry. Well, something like that comes soon. They are rather disparate. The discourses are scattered, and they are partly characterized by a negative bias toward the topic. The big exception being Hannah Arendt, if you want to counter as a phenomenologist, which I do. So in order to mobilize the sources of phenomenological concepts of the public sphere, one needs to look at the indirect approaches and pay attention to descriptions of potentially or implicitly public situations in some phenomenologists' works, or go to the fringes of phenomenology where the topic is more present. The aim is to identify, so the aim of this book, this is now becoming this own book, is to identify different strands in the phenomenological tradition that address the topic or fail to address it, to relate them to one another and to extract valuable ideas, debates, and concepts for a more comprehensive phenomenological theory of the public realm. And this is how this emerged. So these are the 5 chapters, which I'm going to talk you through a little bit how I want to structure looking at the phenomenological tradition. So of course, there's not enough time to go into all of it, so I'm skipping Husserl here. We can talk about it in the discussion. I'm focusing a little bit on Schütz. I'm also skipping the Heidegger Arendt part because I'm going to talk about Arendt, but I'm happy also to address that in the discussion. And at the moment, I'm just working on the 4th chapter on the French existentialists. So this is actually what I've really been doing here in Buenos Aires in the last weeks, right? Okay, so let's look at this first chapter here. So the big lacuna, I'm calling it, because I mean, we don't find anything on the public realm in Husserl so much, or we can talk about it if you see it differently. I'd be interested to hear your opinions. But definitely, Alfred Schütz, who is considered one of the most influential figures of phenomenological sociology, writes this fantastic book, The Structures of the Life World. Berger and Luckmann continued it, and conceptualizes sort of the basics of phenomenological sociology there, with meticulous analysis of how the life world unfolds in layers of meaning that constitute our social everyday world. But descriptions of how a public realm or a public space is constituted, or of what it means to be in public or act in public, are completely missing. Nothing there at all in these 500 pages. It's fascinating, right? I mean, here's a sociologist. This is not somebody who's interested in theoretical philosophy mostly, but somebody who is doing sociology. And no, I'm skipping this. Otherwise I start deviating too much into details. So what I try to do in this chapter on Schütz is that I try to find answers why this is so. And I actually have 3 answers to the question, is there a phenomenology? Why isn't there a phenomenology of the public realm in Schütz, or is there one? And the first answer is there is none, because Schütz equates the term public with social and intersubjective. The second answer would be, well, there is one, but only implicitly. One has to re-examine the concepts of social types and their scales of anonymity and use them to develop a phenomenological description of the public realm and publicness. And the answer 3 would be, well, there is one, even explicitly, but in a rather restrained form in this one paper on the well-informed citizen. So just to give you a quick, dive in quickly here. So one reason why the public does not become a topic for Schütz, and this is important because many philosophers do that. And I think this is a problem, actually. It does not become a topic for Schutz. The reason could be that everything that is labeled as social and intersubjective is understood as being public. And that is frequent in philosophical discourse. I call this the philosophical public-private differentiation. And I think that's derived from the normal way we talk about it. So this is not originally philosophical vocabulary, but it is a vocabulary that has been drawn from the life world to address epistemological and ontological problems. Given that we are dealing in Schutz with a phenomenology of the social world, this might be regarded as a disappointing lack in differentiation, which ignores the fact that there are private and public spaces within the social world that make a difference in how we behave, which norms we follow, which systems of relevance are active. I mean, also a big topic for Schutz. And last but not least, how we effectively inhabit these spaces. It seems, however, that Schutz is much more interested in the epistemological point of view and the ontological one also concerning the public-private differentiation. This is why Schutz does not get tired to stress that that the world is the intersubjective world, it is the shared world, and therefore the public world. The life world is certainly not my private world, as he writes. It is an intersubjective world accessible to everyone. Schutz is thus using the public-private differentiation in such a basic ontological and epistemological way that, in fact, it has no place anymore in the social world itself. Although Schutz, similar to Arendt, speaks of us as actors on a social scene, the scene seems to be the same everywhere. So the other explanation that I shortly was relating to was that Schutz indeed does pay very close attention to different strata within the social world that he articulates in terms of levels of anonymity. So here you have a quote, I won't read that out, so you probably all know how Schutz talks about persons who I encountered directly as my fellow men, Mitmensch. The contemporary, the Zeitgenosse, is encountered as a social type in the everyday world, like, for example, the bus driver. Space and time, closeness and distance, and formal structures of attainability and restorability are important for the constitution of different social types and social relations. These factors stratify the social world into levels of anonymity and mediatedness. While living we relations are the closest form of social encounters, there are numerous other everyday situations where, quote, our conduct is simply based on the most anonymous social data, end of quote. The latter could be just what we understand by public encounters in public space, for example. This could be used for a phenomenological description of the public realm itself, even if this was not Schutz's project. The third way into a Schutzian phenomenology of the public realm takes the most direct path via his 1946 paper, The Well-Informed Citizen, when he was in the US already. Framed as an essay on the social distribution of knowledge, it makes surprisingly normative statements in the end about, I don't know if you can read this here, if I should move. Maybe I should move this. Let me see if I can do this without shutting everything down. Yeah. Okay, now I lost the. Sorry, I just. It's still there. Yeah. There, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. It's the. Sorry, shouldn't have done it, but you're right. No. So that here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So I just wanted you to be able to read this quote because it's pretty surprising for somebody who always writes as neutrally as Schutz does. So here he says, the well-informed citizen So he claims that it would be his duty and the privilege of the well-informed citizen in a democratic society to make his private opinion prevail over the public opinion of the man on the street. So I would need a long time to unpack this here, but just this is the point where he mentions the public sphere at all, this is where it happens. What sounds like an elitist rejection of mass democracy turns out to be a concerned analysis of a world in which no one has a full grasp of the complexity of interrelationships and in which public opinion can therefore be easily manipulated. What is remarkable and slightly troubling about Schütz's portrayal of the situation, which in many ways echoes John Dewey's The Public and Its Problems, is that in contrast to the American pragmatist, Schütz somehow fails to arrive at a concept of collective action. The well-informed citizen remains a spectator who already struggles with the challenge to get an adequate picture of what really matters. So the second strand, just to mention it quickly, of phenomenological existential hermeneutics is roughly characterized by the mentioned antagonistic keywords of das Man, the one, versus plurality. Heidegger's descriptions of publicness being obscure and flattening and being in time are well known. They have evoked a whole tradition either passionately defending the public realm or adhering to an elitist distrust of it. What becomes clear through these debates is that there is a certain existential hermeneutic double structure of the public sphere. So I'm not completely rejecting Heidegger here in favor of Arendt. The story is much more complicated, but with Heidegger himself, the story is, of course, also pretty complicated. So I'm happy to talk about it in the discussion. But here, I just want to say that an ambivalence comes out in the discussion between those two positions. There is a public potential to reveal who one is, as Arendt says, but there is also a potential to obscure it, to flatten it, to anonymize it, to streamline it, not least to manufacture it as a public image. Arendt tries to evade this ambivalence to some extent by introducing a strict normative separation between the political, which is the successful public sphere, and the social, which is the disguising, flattening public sphere. That this has problematic implication has been pointed out by many people, and I'm not going further into it here. What I think is more interesting, because less known maybe, is that one of the results of my research so far is that it is more on the fringes of phenomenological research that questions of publicness and being in public receive explicit attention. In the third chapter, I would like to bring two voices from these fringes into an unusual dialogue. Helmut Plessner from philosophical anthropology and Irving Goffman from microsociology. Two additional voices in the background are Michel Foucault, who reminds us famously that visibility is a trap, and Hans Blumenberg, who claims that visibility is the fundamental human condition. Blumenberg, who described his field of research as phenomenological anthropology, argued that the basic fact of being visible and of being conscious of one's visibility makes human beings emphatically public beings. This implies games, rules, and norms of visibility and distance, as well as masks, scripts, and roles to hide and to present ourselves, orchestrated by a social order that tells us what to show and what to conceal, when and how. Philosophical anthropology and microsociology approach this topic from different angles, but find common ground in the attributed significance of such theatrical performances and their implied public nature. Another point of convergence concerns the vulnerability implied in visibility. Visibility complicates consciousness and existence on an individual as well as on a social level. It is closely connected to reflective forms of self-consciousness and to emotions such as shame and pride. It can expose us to ridicule, create ambiguities, and make us not fit in. This can have grave consequences for our social existence, which proves to have public layers that are connected to protection and recognition. If one is deprived of those layers, one's dignity and personality are endangered. While I emphasize the joys and this indispensability of our theatrical existence, as Goffman calls that at some point. So while I emphasize the joy with Plessner's enthusiastic defense of the artificiality of public life against all community ideas. So this is a defense, this is against community, right? This is a defense of not this homegrown, organic happiness, but Plessner says, no, it's good that we have distance, roles, artificiality, and let's be happy about it. So what Goffman does is having a more, let's say, sober look and a more distanced look at the norms that guide behavior in public places is the title of one of his books. Likewise, the issue of vulnerability through visibility comes into view from various sides. While Plessner diagnoses a fundamental ambiguity in the human constitution, which must be protected by societal form, Goffman shows how practices in public institutions, such as psychiatric hospitals, remove patients from such forms. Both authors thus derive ethical and political conclusions from the fact of visibility. And you know that Goffman also wrote this famous book on asylums. And of course, an asylum is a public institution, as are prisons, there is this interesting fact that public institutions very often have precisely the function to isolate from the public and to take away all those protected kind of visibility and transform it into something completely different. And you can look at that, you can gain a good look at that with Goffman's work, I think. The fourth strand of French existentialism, which I'm working on right now, continues the topic of visibility and vulnerability through the look, exposure, and power. Indeed, it seems that Sartre already applies paradigmatic experiences of publicness for the description of intersubjectivity at large, as well as for intimate situations. He talks of, quote, a millionfold exposure as the proof of my human condition, as an object for all other living people, as thrown in the arena, again, quote, beneath millions of looks and escaping myself millions of times. So this is like an experience of public shaming on the internet, right? So before, avant la lettre, the language he uses here. Sartre also captures the phenomenal quality of the look as, quote, the pre-numerical presence of the other, which manifests itself as an intangible, fleeting, and omnipresent reality. It is permanent and ubiquitous, as he says. This can be a powerful tool for an analysis of public experiences, especially also online exposure, where the look is mediated and multiplied through digital technology. Furthermore, this focus leads us to directly to questions of power and recognition in interpersonal and social relations. From the very beginning, the look is not something that just happens between two people. It is therefore not far-fetched to employ it in analysis of power structures that shape visibility. What Simone de Beauvoir and Frantz Fanon elaborate on the basis of Sartre's paradigm, however, changes, diversifies, and complicates it. Sexist and racist looks are not just challenges to be taken up and look back. They create male and white spaces, and with them, invisible normalities and normativities. I would like to, while reading these authors, I would especially like to draw the attention to the public scenes that are evoked in the author's descriptions. And interestingly, there are a lot. I mean, you all know that from Fanon, but also in Sartre, there's a lot of public scenes. When they go to examples, you can learn. That's what I try to do. I especially look at those and see if there is something special happening. And especially Fanon's example, where the child says, this happens also in public space, look, an N-word. This shows how a specific public order is experienced as well as inscribed in the bodies of the gendered and racialized existences. Last but not least, all French existentialists were public intellectuals. They were professionals of public engagement and passionate about it. Apart from being philosophers, they published literary magazines, wrote acclaimed theater plays, and authored widely read novels. This makes the existentialists an interestingly hybrid case of theorists and practitioners of the public sphere. For a phenomenology of the public realm, this can be integrated as a first-person perspective on public commitment. One way to look at it is Beauvoir's theory of encroachment and the general idea how being condemned to freedom leads to public engagement. But Sartre also develops a specific approach in what is literature. With his increasing communist ambitions, Sartre mainly wants to reach out to the proletariat. This is no easy task, but rather a dilemma. Sartre knows that he belongs to the bourgeoisie and that his theater plays on the rive droite are rather frequented by the oppressors of the middle class, as he says, than the oppressed. This makes the relationship of the total intellectual to his audience delicately complicated. And it's interesting, a few scholars of theater studies have been writing interesting papers about that. Sartre eventually arrives with, I think, rather a theoretical answer to this predicament than a practical one. In his critique of dialectical reason, he opposes the series, seriality, as a specific social formation conditioned by material social objects to the group which can act in concert. As I read it, and as Sartre's example also seemed to suggest, these can be interpreted as two fundamental modes of publicness. One passively arranged into powerless anonymity, and his examples are what? Lining up for the bus and listening to the radio, right? So mass media. And the other active and activated by a common project, storming the Bastille, of course. The three main moments that characterize the existentialist's approach to the public realm and publicness in theory and practice, I think, are thus freedom, power, and revolution. Freedom is essential, since it is not only the goal, but also the means of political change. This involves a theory of a reading audience, as well as reflections on encroachment as of free existences relating to one another. Power struggles give us an agonistic picture of the public, including counterpublics. Revolution finally poses the question of how to act together and how to overcome alienation and false consciousness. So I think so far I'm in my research here, and the fifth part should be more going into contemporary discourses, where I also want to say, I mean, there's nothing explicit about the public realm, right? I mean, I can draw on some work of critical phenomenologists. I think that it is very important to look at interdisciplinary perspectives, to anthropology, to urban studies, to media studies, but I'm not yet there. So what is this? It's 5 minutes, but I could also stop here. I mean, that's also okay. Yeah, just to make sure. Yeah, you sure? Okay. So I think the last thing I want to do is still talk about a sort of a clarifications of what can be meant by the term public, and to suggest for classes of how we experience publicness. This is the last package I want to give to you today. So you know, we can talk about the word public is used in many ways. There are translation problems. Öffentlichkeit in German is much smoother. In English, it is rather an adjective. Then we can talk about publicness or publicity, and also the opposite of public is not always the private, right? So if you think about Plessner, it's public versus the communal. In Dewey, public versus dispersed. In Sennett, public versus intimate. In Kant, public versus secret. In Arendt, public versus societal, or public versus elitist in Dewey. So what interests me as a phenomenologist is if there is a possibility to relate that family of concepts here to possible experiential grounding. And my suggestion is that there are four. We can think of the public in terms of a mode. And the mode, again, and this is important, comes in two versions. First, so I use the terms publicness and publicity here rather contingently, because publicness refers to the translation of Heidegger's Öffentlichkeit in English, and publicity, the translation of Kant's Publizität in English. So, and publicity, of course, is what we mostly know from the Enlightenment as a mode of discourse, thought and action. So the mode being it's visible, it's open, it's transparent, there's unrestricted access. In contrast, publicness is also a mode, but one which implies a basic sharedness. And this is obviously not the same as publicity. Philosophers have spoken about the publicness of meanings, language, and practices. Often this was used as an argument against private minds. And as I said, I find this rather problematic. This kind of discourse causes confusion because it mixes up inner worldly spaces with an epistemological discourse on world access. Apart from that, publicness also seems to have its dark side, as Heidegger famously argued. The sharedness of meanings and practices can, even must, result in the conformity of common practices. This implies superficiality, idle talk, averageness, obscurity. I would like to emphasize that publicness can imply this flattening aspect, but that it can also be made explicit as a sharedness of the world. This would take Heidegger in a different direction, closer to John Dewey, maybe. And moving on to the second meaning of public that designates a setting. This is a specifically erected, inner-worldly and demarcated architecture or design. So something we build, right? So we build public and private spaces. It can either take the open form of public space or more specifically assume the architectonics of a stage, a space of appearance in the Arendtian sense. There are varieties of mediation that transcend the real spatio-temporal space of bodily appearance and create metaphoric spaces and settings, which are discursive, communicative, virtual, or institutional. In such settings, arguments, opinions, personalities, images, principles can appear in medially preformed ways. This helps us to pay attention to how publicness is built, arranged, and designed. Thirdly, the meaning of public implies an order and a specific kind of norms that also invade domestic or private spaces, containing, as Goffman says, the ground rules and the associated orderings of behavior that pertain to public life. By working on the model of social order, Goffman can address the social normativity on a very basic level, discerning acts that are approved and acts that are felt to be improper. Also, institutions are public in the sense of a normative order that pervades society. Finally, a fourth meaning of public concerns as specific social formations. When Dewey speaks of a public, he has a community of those affected in relation to their governments in mind. When Arendt speaks about the public in terms of judging spectators, she means judging spectators. When Sennett speaks about public life, he thinks about being and interacting with strangers. Aaron Gurwitsch, for example, just calls it being among another, untereinander sein. All of these are different social formations, and this only demonstrates how multifaceted it can be. But what I wanted to bring across in this last section was that we can think of public experience in terms of a mode, in terms of settings. So I'm thinking about this in terms of how to enter different fields of descriptions, in terms of order and in terms of social formation. So much for now, and thank you very much for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you very much for this fascinating talk on this very important and current topic. And now we have time for Q&A. Questions here? Anyone? Okay, we have one, two. Okay, and then if maybe we will have to see here if someone. But for the moment, we can just.
Hola, hola. I see. Okay, thank you for your talk. I find your project very innovative. Um, I guess as someone who's not part of the circles of phenomenology, I'm always intrigued, not only in your talk, but in many um, settings where the topic is discussed about like the usage of the term phenomenology and its scope. Um, I have the feeling that something similar happens to critical theory, where sometimes, you say a critical theory of something, and you can use the term in a sort of more restrictive sense, where you say, okay, the Frankfurt School, and there are certain methodological commitments that you can easily understand. But then critical theory has been expanded, and now that like there are so many things that are like Judith Butler's critical theory, decolonialism is critical theory, feminist epistemology, and when you explain like what kind of phenomenological tradition you're relying on, I also had the feeling that I was a bit lost about what are the ground commitments that underlie all these like very different authors, that I acknowledge that they are all somehow connected to phenomenology, but they're just connected in such different ways. In some cases, I think it's easier to understand this connection. For example, Merleau-Ponty, okay, I can see the connection to Merleau-Ponty and Husserl in a very clear way. Then if you go to Sartre, okay, then we have phenomenology and Marxism and Hegelian, it's a big mix. And then Fanon, it's a bit further. So I guess at a certain point, I get a bit lost about like what are the limits, or what exactly are we talking about when we say, okay, if you're planning to do a phenomenology of the public sphere, other than a set of authors connected to this perspective in a way, what are like the ground theoretical commitments that you identify as connecting them all?
Yeah, thanks very much for this question. I mean, you are right. I think the same thing that you said about critical theory could apply to phenomenology. It's just a heterogeneous tradition where everybody nearly has to murder their father, right? So that's and that makes it complicated sometimes to say what are the general commitments. I've been trying to do that in the second part when I said, well, phenomenology is it is about appearance, right? And appearance is connected to experience, and experience is connected to experiencing subjects who are themselves appearing in a world. That is a very basic commitment, but it is very different from how Habermas approaches the topic. It is very different from how Luhmann approaches the topic. So if you say here we are talking about the public realm in the very basic sense, that the very basic layer is that we are experiencing beings that appear in a world that appear to us, and we somehow have to deal with that appearance. Yeah? We build spaces, or we form them, or we imagine them, or whatever, but we somehow have to deal with that kind of basic fact of appearance and visibility. Then I think it unites these authors, really. So without saying you have to have a commitment to the transcendental reduction or whatever, I think that the authors that I have tried to bring together here would be united by caring about how we orient ourselves in a world where we appear, and how in that way social spaces become public, become imbued by power, and sort of, and how we build them. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave it with that, if that is kind of, yeah.
Thank you, Sophie, so much. It was very insightful. Thank you. When I prepared my talk for today, I was struggling with the term, actually, what does public meant for me, because it was really a topic that I addressed before. So thank you so much for that. I have many questions, but I'm going to focus on one. This concept of publicity that you mentioned connects with discourse. I was wondering because you made a remark about democracy before, and it was actually in ancient Greek when democracy, so the story goes, emerged, and there was this idea of publicity by meaning that it was something in the middle that was reachable for everyone. No? That it was there and you can reach for that and understand that thing, maybe a law or some kind of normative setup. So I was wondering if publicity or the public realm or sphere, maybe it should be better put, is it really an homogeneous space, an homogeneous kind of realm, or is it public for whom or from which kind of perspective? Because not every perspective bestows publicity just by being a perspective. I mean, some actors kind of determines what publicity is, why, in which form should be that public act interpreted. So that's my first question. What do you mean with public? Is it really something in the middle, or is it just something that kind of is more heterogeneous than we think, or what I think? And the second question is regarding your second thesis, I think, about the digital age. And you mentioned that in the digital age, the experiential dimension becomes even more important. I was wondering if you can maybe linger a little bit on that assessment. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for these questions. So I start with the second one because this is going to be rather short. But what I meant by that is, if you look at the 20th century, it is very much focused on what I would call the TV paradigm. So people talk a lot about mass media, and mass media is sort of the paradigm by how the public sphere is thought. I mean, no surprise about that. And here the experience of the radio listeners or whatever is much less important than when in the digital age and with social media, people can start to be more active again, right? So the passivity before that of mass media is something where you can talk about experience like Sartre does it in terms of seriality. I think that seriality still applies also in the digital age, but it gets more diversified in terms of how you describe it. Also, for example, what I meant by the blurring aspects is that you can be on your phone at home and sort of in a bodily experience, you sit in a private protected place, but you can be absolutely exposed at the same time while, I don't know, posting something, right? So, and you can, and I think this needs more descriptive work. It's not like you go out on the agora and then you have the full I'm in public experience, but you have more mixed experiences. That's what I meant by that. Your other question, I hope I understand it correctly, but there is a lot in there. So I think on the one hand, you can have a normative approach to what is actually public. So if you take Hannah Arendt, for example, and her concept of opinion in the term of a reflective judgment, she would say, well, an opinion, but just blurting out what your private interest is not even a qualified opinion because it has not related to the res publica. So there needs to be always some distancing of your own private interest in order for it to be qualified as a public opinion. And she has the hope that this will sort itself out in the public sphere as Habermas does. So we have this idea of die Kläranlage der Öffentlichkeit, as Habermas has put that once. But these are very normative concepts of when do we call something as deserving to be really public. You can be a little bit more modest and say, well, I mean, something becomes public if attention of many is directed to it. And there's a whole, I mean, if you read these people like Lippmann, for example, at the beginning of the age of mass media, the whole or Bernays, who had this book he called earlier propaganda, but then changed it into public relations. So the whole branch of public relations does nothing else but tries to direct human attention to a specific person, thing, discourse, whatever. So this is on a very descriptive and more modest way. You can do that also with Schütz and say, although Schütz interestingly also doesn't talk about common relevance structures, but I think that would really be necessary. If something is public, you develop attention and a common relevance structure, and ideally then also possibilities to act, although that this is not always there. But this would be far less normative. So there can be whatever populist topic or whatever unimportant topic suddenly become a big public issue just because attention is directed to it. And I don't want to lose these phenomena in my analysis, you know. I want to, I really want to stress the ambivalences here, and that's why I'm not directly going to a normative theory of the public. Then I could do Hannah Arendt or Habermas or whatever, and that would be fine. But I'm more interested in this ambivalent character, that it can be that way and it can be that way, but in any way, you will have this request of attention and of attending to something together. And then again, it's also more than joint attention, right? So, I mean, here are the things that interest me that come in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. It's, I mean, it creates more confusion than it resolves, but I think this is the working process that you are in. And it's so, I mean, it's so interesting to see all the different pathways that you open, and I will struggle to close them, but I think that's not the idea behind. Now, and one kind of confusion that I have is, well, we have this classical German Enlightenment understanding of Öffentlichkeit, the realm of reason from Kant to Arendt and to Habermas. Well, where it's a kind of imaginary, it's not an imaginary space, it's a space of reason, of arguments, and of giving reasons. And I was thinking that the public space for the phenomenologists is, on the contrary, often a place where no reasons prevail, where, on the contrary, more oppression prevails, be it masculine dominance or other kind of social dominance. Minorities are always oppressed in the empirical public space, whereas in the ideal public space of reason, freedom prevails. So yeah, it's as if the phenomenologists would stick to the empirical condition of publicity, where always oppression prevails, whereas the Enlightenment philosophers, they are in the ideal public space. I don't know what you say about this tension.
Yeah, thank you. So and sorry if I caused confusion, but this is really that is the work in progress there, right? So I think that what you were describing is what I called at the beginning the predicament of the public sphere, and I think this is the case since Hegel's critique of Marx, of Kant, and then of course continuing with Marx. So you have an abstract idea of equality, justice, and so on and so forth, but it's only formal and not concrete and material. So, and this is the struggle that we're dealing with ever since then, and sort of the dark side of enlightenment and so on. So all of these people are in that discourse. I would not say that the phenomenologists are all on, I would not make the division between empirical and rational. I would say the phenomenologists are on the side of the critique insofar as they are Marxists, and only then. because Schütz is not there, Husserl is not there. I mean, I would say it's actually only the ones who are in this Hegelian Marxist tradition who look at oppression, who look at, who look at the negative side. Arendt, I would say, is a special case because Arendt is not a rationalist. But Arendt is someone who would not say the public sphere is not the space of reason, it's a space of appearance. And it's not where reason prevails, but where rhetoric is important, where, where other things, that's why Arendt always says, well, if she could answer to Habermas like that, but this is an idea of a philosopher of the public sphere. The real public sphere doesn't work like that at all. It works with spectacle, it works with rhetorics, it works with, but still there is something that lets people appear and show themselves. So she does have this kind of, there is a positive aspect to the space of appearance, which is not only suppressive and negative, but to the very contrary, which is the real realization of the human being in a certain way. It's a very emphatic conception, of course, but it is not limited to reason at all. It doesn't exclude reason. So I would place Arendt neither on the one side, nor on the other side. And I would see phenomenologists rather, so just to say that very quickly, what I first wanted to say with regard to Schütz and then didn't say it. My explanation why many of the early phenomenologists do not write about the public realm at all is that none of them are liberals. And the public, except Schütz, and that's why Schütz it's even more puzzling. But, Schiller, Husserl, Reiner, they were all not, nobody here defends the Weimar Republic and its public sphere or whatever. They all rather think about community. And that's why Plessner is so interesting. And in Schütz, however, who studies with Kelsen and von Mises, this is really surprising. This is really, for me, this was really like, I don't understand it. I understand why Husserl doesn't write about the public sphere, but I don't understand why Schütz doesn't do it. So I think you can rather, it will rather turn out that it depends on the phenomenologist's political orientation, how, if they find this an interesting phenomenon or not, or how they approach it. Yeah, so much for that.
Well, I have a quick question if nobody's okay. I just wondered I was wondering if you thought about the transformation of authority with the transformation of the public realm from the 20th to the 21st century, and this maybe the change in hierarchy between the centralized discourses and the now the social networks, democratization between, I'm not sure, and what are the effects on the public realm from this apparent democratization? And just related to that, what has become of the public intellectual today, or what's the place of the authorized voice in society?
I think these are actually two questions, although they both have something to do with authority. So on the one hand, there was, of course, at the beginning of the 21st century, I would say up until 2010, a rather euphoric discourse about what this now means, that people can contribute to creating their own news, and how sort of gatekeeping is not kept to those journals anymore and their editors, but is becoming a crowd thing, and all those from crowdsourcing to so there were a lot of positive ideas. And the author I mentioned, Sisi Papakarisi, she's one of those exponents who is actually, they always call them techno-optimists or techno-pessimists, because there doesn't seem to be anything in between. Either you find that development wonderful or you find it dreadful. And indeed, I would say, so the way how she describes how mediation changes through the network of Twitter in that case would be something where you could use the word it's democratized. But then again, as of 2010, 13, this breaks. So, and I don't even know what she would say today. So, because I mean, I don't have to talk about this. We all know that with all those bots and they destroying the possibility of this democratization and the economization of the platform. So I think that dream is dreamt. So that we don't that it would be great, but that's over. And I think we are rather back to 1925 Lippmann's book, who says, well, the public needs to be manipulated, you know? And Bernays, I mean, who really speaks about an invisible state and things like that. And so, and I mean, we're talking about really 100 years ago. And already back then, the ideas were coming up that because there are so many confusing things in the public sphere, nobody can wrap their head around it anymore. Information is not trustful. Many topics that we have nowadays as well. And that is why Lippmann is the inventor of the term of gatekeeping. This is why he argues we need gatekeeping and we need, so I would say we are back at that stage where we must wonder what can be the authority of trusted media and public discourse without getting to manipulation. And yeah, what is the role of the public intellectual? I mean, that I would say very much has also been completely ruined by commercialization. I mean, everybody of you who tried to do something publicly and communicate philosophy to the public in whatever formats, you will see that you have 3 minutes or I don't know, break it down, dance it, whatever, in 40 seconds. It's very hard. We cannot imagine that you have a person today speaking on the radio like Adorno did in the 60s. I mean, nobody would even be able to follow the sentences anymore. And but that was public television or radio at that time. So I think it has really become a lot harder to be a public intellectual in the format we used to have it. I would really say it has nearly become impossible. I'm a little bit pessimistic about that, but I'm happy to hear other suggestions.
Before closing, I would like to ask you just a final question, just if nobody else has questions. No? Okay. Final question about your project. If you can tell us a little bit about this project, about this book, when are you planning to not finishing it, please? Please, I don't want to give you anxiety. But yes, if you can tell us more about what are your plans in the future, what we will expect of this project, and just to be aware of it and to buy your book when it's, we want to know more about your work and keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I mean, what I showed you with the 5 strands, so I'm in the middle of the 4th now, so which means 3 have already been written. And I really, really hope that I get a first manuscript done by the end of the year. And then, of course, you know, the process, getting feedback, whatever. And so this book on phenomenological approaches to the public realm, that I hope is not too long until it really becomes a book. And the other one, well, I can only start when I finish this one. No, in English. both of that is, so as I said, I haven't told the publisher yet that it's going to be 2 books. So who knows what they're going to do with it, but it needs to be 2 books. Otherwise it's too long, you know? And let's see what the options are. But I think, so maybe just to give you a little bit of context, it's actually the same thing that happened to me with my dissertation when I was interested in what is the question of validity, Geltung und Rechtgebung. And then I suddenly discovered these authors on phenomenology of law, which is a completely different topic. But I suddenly found that there was there was no comprehensive book on the people. And a similar thing has happened to me now, where I thought, well, actually, this needs to be done, and I need to do it for myself to work myself through the options that there are, the commonalities or not, the, you know, how to weave this together, because I think there are interesting thoughts in all of these people that I'm covering, otherwise I wouldn't do it. But it then will become its own project. So that's, yeah, what sometimes happens.
Beyond the report. Nice to know. I could follow your work on your anthropology. It was very important for my dissertation because it's the first book that so I had already read your papers on Husserl's ethics, but then I found this book, and it's the only book that I found on this at the time the parallelism of the forms of reasons in terms of domains of legitimacy. I discovered that in the archive in Köln, and but then I can see the relationship between that and the work you did afterwards. But I think it's nice as a community to talk about how each of us in different parts of the world we like work and how we work, and yeah, so it's you feel like accompanied in the distance because we are all struggling with so and then you will have to come back to present your book. So well, thank you, Sophie, again, and thank you everyone. And she will be next week at the University of Buenos Aires talking about Hannah Arendt. And okay, that's the end of today's conference. Thank you for being here. Gracias. Are you happy with it was really nice?
I mean, I'm just throwing out ideas. I could have thrown out 5 slides more with it.
No, I know you have so much. You have already
much material. And
here in Buenos Aires, you wrote a whole chapter already.
no. I was reading, and I started